Bent double, like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through the sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched asleep. Many had lost their boots, but limped on, bloodshod. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of gas shells dropping softly behind. Gas? Gas! Quick, boys! An ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time, but someone was still yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in fire lime, dim through the misty panes and thick green light as under a sea of green. I saw him drowning. In all my dreams before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the wide eyes writhing in his face, his hanging face, like a devil's sick of sin. If you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from those froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues. My friend, you would not tell with such high zest, to children ardent for some desperate glory, the old lie, Dulce et decorum est, pro patria mori.
Do you know the way? Do you know the way? Do you know the way? Do you know the way?
The first couple of lines of the poem, which describe what the soldiers looked like, just sort of gives the idea that they almost look like they're homeless and that they look very raggedy and sickly, and it just shows the hardship that they've been through and how all of them were struggling. The next line, which says, "Till on the haunting flares we turned our backs," is the haunting flares are a metaphor for the fire that they were turning away from at the end of the battle. The next line, which says, "And towards our distant rest began to trudge," the word trudge implies that they are not like just walking there, that they are very tired, that they are exhausted, and that they are just walking and trudging through just to get to where they can sleep. The next few lines describe the soldiers in more detail. It tells how some of them have lost their boots and how all of them are lame and blind and just very unaware of what's going on around them at that time. The last couple of the lines of the first stanza just show how exhausted the soldiers are and how they were so tired that they weren't even aware that they were being under attack by gas shells. Overall, the first stanza has a very tired and pathetic tone. That tone immediately shifts from being tired and pathetic to being concerned and energetic at the beginning of the second stanza. The next few lines describe the chaos that ensues once they discover that they are under attack to be able to put their gas masks on so that they can breathe and survive. The speaker then describes the image of a man who is not able to put his mask on in time and how he suffers in the green gas. The color green symbolizes the world that the speaker sees from under his mask, and it also symbolizes death since he saw his friend drown in the sea of green gas. The third stanza is only 2 lines where the speaker describes how he is constantly haunted in all of his dreams by the sight of his friend guttering, choking, and drowning towards him in the sea of gas. It is evident in this stanza that the speaker is suffering from PTSD. At the beginning of the last stanza, the tone shifts to being bitter and angry at the world around him. He tells the audience that if they were in the same situation as him, then their outlook on war would be much different than it is currently. He describes the utter pain and misery that his friend was going through while he was suffering on the back of a cart. He described how his friend's face looked as if the devil was sick of sin, and how at every jolt you could hear him choking on his own blood. He describes his friend's condition as awful as any disease that has ever existed on Earth. He finishes by telling the audience that if they were in his situation, they would not lie to their children and say to them, "Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori," which is translated to, "It is sweet and proper to die for one's country." Most of the poetic devices in this poem are imagery resulting from the similes and metaphor that the author uses. Examples would be his hanging face like a devil sick of sin, the haunting flares, and as under a green sea I saw him drowning. The devil's face simile is meant to show how the man who has fallen victim to the gas has contorted his face so much because of the pain that he was in. The haunting flares are a metaphor for the fire from the battle that they just left. The green sea represents the gas that the man was choking on. The speaker is is a war veteran that is still somewhat young and is suffering from PTSD, and we know that the speaker is haunted by the instance depicted in the poem. The occasion of this piece is that the speaker needed to let out his struggles from this memory, and it is a recollection of a traumatic battle. The audience is the speaker's friends back home that have a romantic view of war. He says, "you and my friend" in the last stanza, which indicate the audience, and the assumptions of the audience are that they still think that war is something that is romantic and glorious, and something that people would want to fight in. The purpose of the poem is to show the horror of war through a specific battle in memory, and the message is that the war is not what people think it's like. The subject of the poem is that it's not glorious, romantic, or magnificent to die for one's country, and that in reality it is very painful and traumatic. The tone of the poem shifts from being tired and pathetic in the first stanza to being concerned and energetic in the second stanza, to being horrified in the third stanza, to being angry and bitter at the world around the author in the fourth stanza.